Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Michael James and the Live from the Heartland show. One of those people that's been a big influence in my life, and I've known him for a long time, is Bob Lawson. We first met when we both had left Berkeley and were organizers in Uptown with Join Community Union. We were trying to build an interracial movement of the poor. And we worked at Join together, and then we ended up working at Rising Up Angry together. And then Bob went off and ran Tom Hayden's Senate campaign, worked with the United Farm Workers, United Auto Workers, with AFSCME and other unions. He's someone I've always looked to for advice and inspiration. And with all that said, let's bring him on. So good morning to you, Bob.
Good morning.
Let's start off with you giving us a little bit of who you are, where you come from, and how you got involved in politics and in community organizing.
Given our age, that could take a long time.
We got 26 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I got started in, as you mentioned, in politics around the time of Join. I actually was inspired by the civil rights movement in the South, by the SNCC, and I went to Washington, D.C. With SNCC to lobby for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party there. Met people from Mississippi and SNCC organizers, and they talked about their philosophy of organizing, and I was totally inspired. And I said, what should I do? And they said, well, as a white person, your job is to go organize white people, particularly poor white people who have the same issues as we do. We're organizing Black people. We need to work together. And so I said, sure. And I had no idea what that meant. But I got back on the train and went back to California. And fortunately, the next year, I met someone who had been at Join and told me about this project in Uptown in Chicago of building an interracial movement of the poor, focusing on poor whites. And so that I went to, at the end of the year, I went to Chicago, got out of the car in downtown, and they said, get on the L. And I said, what's the L? And they said, go to the Wilson Avenue stop and get off at the Wilson Avenue stop. And I did. And I walked into the Join office, and I was totally hooked on organizing. That I knew nothing about Southern white culture. I knew nothing about Chicago. It was a tremendous learning experience. And it made me realize that we can actually make change, significant change in people's lives, both in terms of improving their housing conditions, what they did, the welfare rights, and also helping people have meaning in their life and feel good working together. And part of the job of an organizer is to work with people that you would never probably run across, but around a shared set of values. Getting together and working together makes you very close and is a wonderful personal experience besides being able to help improve people's lives. So that's sort of how I got hooked on organizing. And then it all went from there.
Well, you always leave out the part I like best, that you were a linebacker on the Cal football team. But you don't always mention that much. But you went on to work with Rising Up Angry when we had started it, and you had gone off to Cincinnati to try to build an organization similar to Join there. And apparently that wasn't really working out. And we had started Rising Up Angry, and you and Diane Fager contacted us and talked about coming back to Chicago, and you did. And you emerged as one of the principal figures in Rising Up Angry until you left, and you went off to do other kinds of organizing. I think then it was the Tom Hayden for Senate campaign in California. but you worked with different unions. How about sharing with our listeners some of those experiences?
Sure. Well, when I left Rising Up Angry in Chicago, it was primarily because I realized that we knew how to organize people, but we didn't know how to build a sustaining organization for power, and we didn't know how to fund it. And so I wanted to learn something. The other thing at the time which was about 1977, I believe. Is that right? Yeah.
Oh, 75 or 76.
Okay. Someplace around then. Yeah. 75 probably. Yeah. Is that those of us who are coming out of the quote unquote new left had actually convinced the majority of the people in the country that the war in Vietnam was wrong and that there had been some movement on civil rights, et cetera. But at the same time, the tactics that our quote unquote movement were using was alienating everybody. And so I thought the idea of figuring out how to run for electoral office, which Tom Hayden was trying to do, he was running as an anti-war candidate and also an economic Democrat running for economic democracy. And so I wanted to learn about that. And fortunately, I was able to get involved in that campaign, and I was the statewide labor coordinator. I knew nothing about the labor movement, but because I had experience organizing poor and working class white people in Chicago, they felt I'd be a good fit for the job. So I had to learn really, really quickly about the labor movement and some about electoral politics. And in that campaign, the United Farm Workers were one of the organizations that endorsed Tom Hayden for the U.S. Senate, as was a fledgling American Federation of Teachers, which at the time public employees were organizing for the first time. And I met a lot of really interesting people and saw a huge potential in the labor movement because it was self-funded. It was bringing people together from all different backgrounds. And the United Farm Workers were blazing a new path. When the National Labor Relations Act was passed, farm workers and domestic workers were excluded, primarily because at the time they were African Americans, and this was a concession to the South. But anyway, in California, the farm workers were working to pass a new state law giving farm workers collective bargaining rights. And so after the Hayden campaign, which he didn't win, but he did go on to build a grassroots organization in California. I was not part of that, but the campaign laid the groundwork for that. But I went to work organizing for the United Farm Workers. And I learned firsthand about organizing workers. And it was a very exciting time because the law had just passed. Workers had newfound rights. And we were able to take many of the organizing techniques that were developed first in the United Auto Workers and then by a guy named Fred Ross in California that really helped develop strong organization at the grassroots level. And we won a lot of campaigns, and I learned a lot about organizing there and saw the real potential of the labor movement and the labor movement for building a interracial movement of the poor, which poor and working class. And so eventually I came back to Chicago, and thanks in large part to Heather Booth and Paul Booth, I ended up at working for AFSCME. I went to work for AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, right after Jane Byrne got elected mayor, because she said she was going to give public employees collective bargaining, which she didn't do. But I stayed with AFSCME for a few years, and when Harold Washington was running for mayor, that he said he was going to give public employees collective bargaining. So I was fortunate to get assigned to work on his campaign. And I was the North and Northwest Side precinct coordinator for the Harold Washington campaign. And after he won the campaign, we organized the city employees, the county employees, thousands and thousands of public employees in Illinois to build an organization and win collective bargaining rights, which was another really exciting time, and was able to, in a deeply racially polarized time, build a multiracial organization around shared values and shared interests. So sort of went on from there after really quickly. After that, for a while, I went out to California. A fellow who I met in the United Farm Workers named Marshall Gans was starting an organization in California called the Organizing Institute, which was to train a new generation of organizers. And so I went out to work with him. And through that experience, for some reason, I got recruited to the Democratic Party in 1988. And I was the field director for the California Democratic Party. And the reason I took the job is because they committed to spending a huge amount of money and hiring thousands of organizers around the state who would try to build a grassroots organization in California for the first time. And unfortunately, the Democratic nominee for president wasn't much of an inspirational guy. It was Dukakis. But we were able to build a very strong precinct leader organization. That was also another really strong learning experience for me. And we could still apply the organizing tactics, because what we were doing was we were trying to build precinct leaders in communities, particularly poor communities and places where there was no infrastructure for Democrats. And so we did that. And that campaign quickly taught me that I didn't want to live in the life of the Democratic Party.
Particularly now.
Well, then too. But anyway, so I went back to the labor movement and eventually went to another organization called the Organizing Institute, which was a totally different one. It was created outside the AFL-CIO, but it was funded by the AFL-CIO. And at the time, the AFL-CIO didn't really do organizing. That's why they had to fund the Organizing Institute on the outside. And we were, again, training a new generation of union organizers. And when John Sweeney was elected president of the AFL-CIO, around a platform of including organizing, they brought the Organizing Institute inside the AFL-CIO. And that's how I got in there. And we actually we trained a lot of young organizers and all of that. The whole idea of the labor movement being a strong organizing force didn't quite catch on at the time, which it should have. But anyway, and so then I went on to work with SEIU and AFSCME later and so on.
You've really done a lot, Bob. I'm learning new things about you, and I've known you a long time. I want to talk a little bit about Marshall Gans and an article you sent, and where he raises some questions about people really participating in democracy from the bottom up. And he does talk about unions as one of the places where that's the truest. But first, let me just ask you briefly, because I'm always working on this myself, what is organizing? How would you give a short definition of organizing?
I think organizing is bringing people together around a shared goal and figuring out the structure that it takes and continuing to expand and grow. I think the key part of, I think there's two key parts of organizing. One is outreach, you're constantly reaching out to more people to try to bring them in and expand the base. And second of all is leadership development. You're looking for people who both have natural leadership qualities, meaning that people respect them, and you're also looking for people who can develop those skills and qualities. Because the more leaders there are, that means the more you're going to be able to do outreach and the more you're going to be able to accomplish. And particularly in organizations that don't have the billions of dollars that the right wing does, that we need to tap into as much leadership skills as people have. But I think, when I think of organizing, it's really doing outreach to bring people together around a shared set of goals and hopefully to build an organization that will last over time and continue to expand.
Well, I like that. And I think one of my fortes is always doing the outreach part. And then you did a lot of outreach too, but also really developing that leadership. And I'm thinking about some people inside of Join and Rising Up Angry who kind of just came out of nowhere and then really emerged, like the two Doveys in the Join Welfare Union. And I'm sure we could come up with other examples. But one of the things that led me to want to have you back on the show again, besides always like seeing you, is to get your take on where you think the country is at now. We just lost an election. And when I say lost, it's not like we're big fans of the Democratic Party. It's not like we rooted for the Democrats all the time or for the government. But over the years, we saw that as an ongoing place to try to work for a better deal for more people. Seems like we're a little bit in disarray now. We lost an election to almost an avowed fascist. What's your take on our current situation? And then we'll get to what you think maybe we ought to be doing.
Well, my take is along that we don't have time to go into the whole thing, but
you're invited back.
The other side has, had a plan, at least since the 1970s, about how to change the whole conversation about the role of government and the role of business. Started with Milton Friedman, where he said the only responsibility of business is to make a profit. And if they are talking about social conscience or responsibility other than making a profit, they're socialists and should not be in business. That was the beginning of the ideological struggle against what we would call the New Deal, and also against the Great Society, where the common overall arching theme was that there was a responsibility of society and of business to help, help citizens, et cetera. And at that time, if we look at the spans of our life, that we've lived through a period where the U.S. had the greatest equality in its history to the time right now where we have the greatest inequality of our history. And that's because the other side has worked consciously over the years, not just to win elections, but to change the role of government, to change the ideological structure in the country, and to create and recruit people to fill all the roles of governing in society. And so I think filling in the infrastructure of the Trump administration is just the next step in their decided role to privatize almost all government services and ensure that the wealthiest have all the power and money. And so part of our job is to slow that process down by resisting it. But I think also part of our problem over the years, and certainly going forward, is what is the long-term plan? How are we building organizations that people are committed to for life, that is around the principles of making life better, and that is always doing outreach, always looking to include and not to exclude people, and always realizing that everybody's not going to agree on every single thing, but what are the main principles that unite you, and that we need to look at what some people would refer to as the class struggle in a fairly serious way, because it is real, and that I don't think we've built the kind of organizations or the kind of power that we need. And I think one of the problems, I think that you alluded to, is that rather than building ongoing organizations, too often we've been on single issue campaigns, or also just looking at electoral campaigns as a solution. And honestly, the Democratic Party, as you know, is controlled by billionaires as much as by everyday people, and it's a struggle inside. But I think our job is to continue to resist, and to resist by building organizations and by figuring out how to unify people around all the time. And electoral part of it is a tactic. It's not the strategy, it's a tactic. So in a nutshell, that's where I think we're at. I mean, I think we need to organize, and train new organizers, and find people who are plugged into the culture and respect people's culture, and bring them together around things that can unite millions of people, which is anger at the unfairness of life for most of us in the country right now.
That's what worked for them. I mean, there was an anger, people just concerned about their general situation, and rather than look at what really determines all these things, they just kind of gave the finger to, in this case, to the Democrats, and went with someone who clearly is not going to bring about things that they want or hope for.
I know, but he, I mean, it's not surprising to me, because he has I guess we can't say it, but you say give the finger. He's upsetting the established order, and what the problem is in people's lives is the established order doesn't work. From the healthcare system,
right,
to the employment situation, to the education system, it doesn't work. And so people who look like and are it's the same. If you think back on our time in Join, people from the South who came up north looking for a better life, they were treated completely unfairly. Well, what was the problem? Part of our job was to respect them and then help them figure out that the problem that they were having was the same as the problem that the Black people and Latino people were having. And by working together, we could solve it. But if we weren't in touch with them and connected to them in a real way, that we couldn't move people to our side on those issues.
We got about 3 minutes left of this segment of this week's Live from the Heartland show. And I wondered if you would like to maybe say a few words about a couple of the organizers you've known. You mentioned Marshall Gans. I threw in here in my notes Marilyn Katz. What do you got to say about these or anyone else in terms of inspiration for younger people getting involved and going out there and doing it?
Well, for the most part, good organizers aren't well known. That it's Marshall Gans is a Harvard professor now, and spends time doing that, and he's definitely made a contribution, as did Marilyn. Marilyn was a PR person, a political operative, and brought a lot of people together. But many of the most inspirational organizers I met are people that will never be famous, but did really incredible things. This may be one story. I have to do it real quick, since when I was organizing for the farm workers, that there was a crew, people who worked in crews. They put a United Farm Worker flag up on their, it was a lettuce truck, their lettuce truck. They were fired that day. from their jobs. And these are people who don't have a lot of money to spare. So we had a meeting to figure out what to do. The people in the union side thought, well, we can file a charge with the Agricultural Labor Relations Board, blah, blah, blah. But the farm workers, and this was a broad, there's young guys, women, whatever, decided, no, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to go back to work tomorrow, and we're going to get on the machine just like nothing happened. We're going to dare them to throw us off. They did that. They got on the machine. They put up the farm worker flag. When it was time to start working, they started working. No one said a word about it. We won that election pretty big.
Nice, Bob.